Our next speaker is accomplished physician, scientist, and author, Dr. Azra Raza. She is the Chan Soon-Shiong Professor of Medicine and the Director of the MDS Center at Columbia University in New York. She is considered an international authority on pre-leukemia and acute leukemia, and supervises a state-of-the-art research lab and largest tissue bank of blood and bone marrow samples from MDS and acute leukemia patients in the country. She has published the results of her laboratory research and clinical trials in prestigious peer-reviewed journals such as the New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, Blood, Cancer, Cancer Research, British Journal of Hematology, and she is the recipient of numerous awards, such as the Hope Award in Cancer Research. She is also the author of a new book, The First Cell. She published it just last year, and it explores cancer from every angle: medical, scientific, cultural, and personal. It is with great pleasure that I turn the stage over to Dr. Azra Raza. Thank you for being with us this evening, Dr. Raza. I'm not sure if we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm just delighted when I have an opportunity. I feel very flattered when young people pay any attention. So I'm going to take full advantage of this opportunity to speak to all of you. Many may be thinking of going into medicine as a career, and many may even already be thinking of a subspecialty in oncology. Why do I say that? Because I interview a lot of prospective medical students, and one thing that I read very often in their essays is that some personal experience with cancer in the family or friends or themselves is what is motivating them even to enter medicine. So with this in mind, I felt that maybe you should be going into medicine with your eyes wide open. By that, I mean that essentially you are entering a field in which you are directly supposed to reduce human suffering. And that means that you have to be able to think of patients as the front and center of everything. I would like to share my screen, if Annabella, you allow me to, because it's saying to me that the host has disabled my screen.
My apologies, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, I'd like to show a few slides because I thought it's better for us to make this conversation as a little more formal so that I don't forget to make the points I'm trying to make. And basically what I'm going to try and tell you is why the patient must come first. And I'll give you my summary right now. And I'm talking specifically about cancer and oncology now. Cancers diagnosed early are curable. Those diagnosed late are incurable. Spectacular advances have been made in cancer research, but for the patients, whether they are diagnosed early or late, not much has changed in 100 years. This is my summary. Doctors prescribe medicines of which they know little for diseases of which they know less in human beings of whom they know nothing. And Voltaire said that ages ago. There's a crisis in oncology. FDA approved a drug which improves median overall survival by 2.5 months at the cost of $100,000 a year. And it's not 2.5 months for every patient, by the way, it's for a fraction of patients. And this happened in June of this year. It's not ancient history. In fact, they just approved selinexor for a relapsed refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, where the response, not even survival, just if the tumor shows a little shrinkage, in 29% of the patients, lasting a median of 3 months, they approved the drug at what cost? $22,000 a month. My friend at Dana-Farber called it ridiculous. And at Mayo Clinic, Vincent says it's laughable to be charging $22,000 a month from 100 patients, 29 of whom can experience for a median of 3 months some shrinkage in the tumor. For me, in 1977, I came to this country. I started treating acute myeloid leukemia, AML, with two drugs we popularly called 7 and 3 because it's 7 days of another. Today in 2020, guess what? I'm still using the same. No, there's a new form, and the new form just has a lipid coat around it with the same results, except improvement for a fraction of patients by 3.5 months. And the cost is $40,000 compared to $4,000. But the question is, if I had acute leukemia today, what would I do? You know what? I'd take the same treatment because life is precious. We are desperate. What do I have to lose? Even if I get 3 at the age of 28. At 29, she gets diagnosed with AML. And what do we offer Lina? The same thing I would have offered her in 1977. Her only chance was to get a bone marrow transplant, but her only brother was not a match. So we gave her eventually a haplotransplant from her brother at City of Hope in LA. She relapsed within 6 months, gave her a second haplotransplant at the City of Hope, and she died at the age of 30 just in March of this year. I went on television, on radio, all over to try and get South Asians to register as potential donors, and 14,000 people stepped up to do so. But there was no match for her. And what a tormented death this child had. I can't tell you the number of evenings I have spent this last winter walking back and forth on my balcony to tortured parents. We failed Lina. So death by leukemia is a local, not an express. Same run, a few more stops. That's medicine, the art of prolonging disease. This fits Lina, except it was written in 1961 by Peter de Vries, great fiction writer who wrote this book, Blood of the Lamb, based loosely on his own experience with his 10-year-old daughter who died of leukemia. Same thing is happening today. I want to talk about case of Andrew. In July of 2016, he developed tingling in his arm, started to exercise, weakness developed, taken to the ER. He was quadriplegic within hours. The neurosurgeon said he had a 9-centimeter large glioblastoma multiforme brain tumor, which is one of the deadliest known to mankind. They could only remove 90%. So from this moment on, all his treating oncologists knew that his prognosis is hopeless. Yet what followed? Extensive surgeries, intensive rounds of chemo, radiation, immune therapy, more chemo, more radiation, more immune therapies. He suffered unbearable toxicities. And the tumors continued to grow. Alas, we failed Andrew also, just like we failed Lina. He died on August 25th, 3 years ago. He was 23 years old. And Andrew was also the best friend of my daughter Shehrzad. He was not her boyfriend. Andrew was gay. But since they were 15, they were inseparable. This group of kids traveled all over Europe together every summer. Andrew is in and out of my house since he's 15 years old. At 22, he's in Paris doing a course in fashion design. He comes back to New York, he gets diagnosed with this horrible disease. And he's dead in less than 16 months. When he was first told his diagnosis, he turned to his mother with such confidence and he said, "Mom, don't worry. Just call Azra. She's on the cutting edge. She's going to find me a cure." This is what slapped me physically in my face. on the one hand, extreme maliciousness of his deadly tumor, and on the other hand, extreme helplessness of all his treating oncologists to offer him one shred of relief from anything. Was it cruel to his family to keep suggesting ineffective agents? What were the alternatives? Should we have told him, enjoy what time you have, but then he would have died of cancer, which is much more painful. Was honesty even a choice? How do you tell the mother of a 22-year-old that we have nothing to offer? What did we offer? Die of cancer or die of the treatment? Why are these the only two choices in 2020? Well, lots of new drugs are being introduced. They prolong survival by 2.5 societies, the public, everyone is putting pressure on them. We boast of godlike technology, cutting and pasting DNA. Go to any national meeting and people are giving themselves gold medals and posturing, talking a big talk, but honestly, it's not helping the patients. Why? Question is, why has the treatment for Paleolithic? This is what I'm asking. Of course, the age-adjusted mortality has decreased 1% a year for the last 30 years for a total of 27% decrease in mortality. But this 1% annual decline parallels a preceding rise for 30 years and then fall, and both parallel rise and fall in smoking. And so the only thing that has happened is anti-smoking campaign and earlier detection. Sure, curing 68% of cancers today, but with what? Slash, poison, burn, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, same thing we were doing before. So where is $250 billion in research gone? Problem is everyone is studying cancer in their research labs and writing grants, not worrying, not knowing what the disease is doing to patients. The issue is that we are learning a tremendous amount about cancer biology. I'm not doubting that for a second. But even in cancer biology, the farther you go into the sea, the deeper it gets. The more reductionists they get, the more problems we are finding. This is an image of Queen Atossa, who lived, Persian queen, 550 BC. One fine day, she finds a lump in her breast. She tries to ignore it. It kept growing, covers it with sheets. It kept growing. So she asked her Greek slave to take out his sword, and he slashed her breast. She is the first cancer patient or breast tumor patient known to survive. And we were slashing breasts 2,500 years ago for women. We are doing the same today. And chemotherapy, you know, that came out of mustard gas. I don't have time to go into all this, but in 1917, these chemical weapons, more than 100 years ago, were developed. And when they accidentally were dropped, and do you know what? The first three chemotherapies that were used, Cytoxan, Melphalan, and chlorambucil, I used with my own hands on my own patient, on my own husband who died of cancer. So in fact, my credentials are that I am an oncologist who sees 30 to 40 cancer patients a week in my clinic. I have a cutting edge research lab that I have supervised for the last 3 decades. But most importantly, I am a cancer widow, so that I've stood on both sides of the bed and have a perspective of cancer that I don't wish even on my worst enemy. What about these new experimental drugs? How well are they performing? 95% trials fail today. 5% that succeed should have failed, because I showed you in my opening slides that they are not doing much for survival at all, few months. At the cost of what? Ruining the patient, bringing the country to on the verge of a financial collapse. Unconscionable. A lot of people are talking about immune therapies, CAR T therapies. It's a great treatment, but then it has so many issues. In 2017, two CAR T cell therapies were approved for children with ALL and adults with advanced lymphoma. $500,000 just to prepare the cells, and another 1.5 million probably to treat these patients in ICU, because they are so toxic that whole industries are arising just to control the side effects. And even if it is working to cure people, it's only even potentially useful for 7,000 patients a year in this country, where we diagnose 1.7 million new cases a year. So for 7,000 people, we have developed this great therapy. Except the secret they never talk about is that these cells, these T cells, which go and kill the tumor in the patient, they cannot distinguish between normal and cancer cells. So they end up killing the whole organ. And the fiscal toxicity to the patients who have cancer is unconscionable. Do you know that 42% patients diagnosed with cancer today in this country will lose every penny of their life saving by 2+ years? How is it possible that as a society, this is what we are doing to patients? You're going to die, we're not going to be able to help you, but let's fleece you of every penny first. I'm sorry for being so blunt, kids, but I don't want to be mollycoddling anybody here. If I don't speak up for everybody, who is going to speak up for us? 40% women in America today with stage 4 breast cancer are being hounded by collection agencies, while no one is cured. The country is on the verge of a financial collapse. Healthcare cost is $3.5 trillion a year. Something's got to change. Why this abysmal failure? Of course, cancer is complicated and it is a moving target. You know, causes of cancer, we talk about hereditary, environmental exposure, some pathogens or random DNA copying errors, or could it be a systemic disease? We can spend days discussing all of this. I want to take this Darwinian evolutionary tree and try to explain in very sort of cartoonish terms to you. This is a normal cell. During the process of proliferation, it doubles its DNA. Let's say there are some random copying errors and retains a mutation for whatever reason, whether it was stressed or pro-inflammatory environment caused it. There is a mutation, which then this cell develops a growth advantage over its neighbors, expands its clone, but each time it divides, it can pick new mutations, so that there are thousands and thousands of clones. And by the time we diagnose the patient, they are up here with these thousands of mutations. And now we are trying to, when we diagnose, we are trying to treat with one targeted drug that is going to target a single mutation out of these thousands. Isn't it only logical that if we could diagnose the patient earlier here, maybe that one targeted therapy would work? Problem is that some patients, yes, they go through the kind of tree I presented with increasing profundity of complexity, but 30 to 40% cancers from the get-go have huge aneuploid changes and chromosomal damage and big-time DNA rearrangements, etc. And they are invasive right from the beginning. And so these are very difficult questions. I'm not trying to minimize the complexity, but at least we can stop harming patients in so many ways, is what I'm saying. And all of this complexity we are trying to address with a reductionist conceit. One gene, one cancer, one magic bullet. Sure, it worked initially for a couple of cancers, CML and APL. But then the vast majority, they contain too many mutations. And we are obsessed with this genetic mutation problem. I guess we have too many DNA sequencers in this country. Whole genome sequencing was performed on 2,600 samples from 38 different tumors through collaboration between 750 institutions in 4 continents. Results were published in 6 papers in Nature in February. I read these papers. Here's my summary. Founder mutations were found in 95% cancers, but 5% did not have any. They were on average 4 to 5 driver mutations, and the conclusion was that cancer is extremely heterogeneous disease, differing from patient to patient, from tumor to tumor in the same patient, from clone to clone in tumor to tumor in the same patient and other patients. Well, this is no surprise because in 1976, Peter Knoll showed that cancer evolved by a stepwise somatic cell mutation with sequential subclonal selection. I know this paper, it's etched on my brain because it's the first paper I reviewed in a lab meeting at Roswell Park Cancer Institute. So my idea of cancer has been colored by this clonal selection for the longest time. And the whole genome study only confirmed what has been appreciated since 50 years. Well, basically, there are thousands of cancers within one cancer. One stem cell gives rise to a clonally expanded population. But then at the same time, there are subclones with slightly different passenger mutations in addition to the founder mutation. Now, if we come in with treatment and the dominant clone is sensitive, it will disappear and patient will enter remission and everything will look hunky-dory for a while. Until as long as patient will relapse when the subclone can rear its ugly head and expand its population and repopulate. This is why there is a whole sequential activation of clones just biding their time to take their turns to expand and fill the population. They are by definition resistant to the treatment we gave because they grew in the presence of that treatment. Think of it like sand piles and cancer. If you start dropping grains of sand, it forms a pile, but after a while, a point is reached when one grain of sand will cause the whole pile to collapse. Well, that last grain of sand that caused the avalanche had nothing different than the thousand other grains that came before it. What has happened is the pile has become unstable. So cancer is a disease of the elderly. With age, our body is unstable at many levels. And so any little thing may be able to tip it in over. I started my career in this country by studying acute myeloid leukemia, a very deadly disease. But within a few years, it was very clear to me that in my lifetime, it won't be cured. And I was unfortunately right because we are still using 7 and 3, like I showed you. But many of my patients gave a story that before they were diagnosed with acute leukemia, they had dropped their counts for many months or years even. And so that stage is called myelodysplastic syndrome or pre-leukemia. So I immediately turned my attention to studying MDS, thinking, wow, we can catch this early and then we can intercept. And what I did next was something, because I'm an immigrant, I came from a foreign land. Had I been raised in this country, I would have next tried to make a mouse model of this illness. But because I was naive, I depended on my instinct rather than tradition and custom. And I said, wow, if I'm going to study this disease, I should have cells of my patients. So what did I do? I just started saving cells. And today, 3 decades later, we have the largest tissue repository in the world for this illness with 60,000 samples, thousands of patients who are followed from pre-leukemia longitudinally with multiple samples as they progress through the natural history of their disease and either enter leukemia or die of other causes. The greatest need we have today in the human cancers, except for a universal cure, is a method of trying to detect presence of cancer before clinically significant symptoms appear. Right, this is what we should be doing, except Sidney Brenner said this 60 years ago. This is just so shocking. We keep repeating the same mistakes. So early detection is the name of the game, not just stage 1 and 2, but precancerous footprints. And the old methods you know very well. I'm talking about using the latest technology, like we can catch circulating T cells, we can look at cell-free DNA, we can look methylation patterns that are unique to every organ and find the lineage of the cell just from pieces of cell-free DNA floating around in the blood. Grail, the company, has announced they can detect 12 cancers with 97% accuracy. Cancer Seek from Thrive shows that combining mutations and protein biomarkers with PET scans, they looked at 10,000 healthy women, detected 26 previously unknown tumors, 17 were early stage, 12 are already in remission. This is what we need to be doing. And Toshiba, the Japanese company, has announced they can detect 13 cancer types in 4 hours from a single drop of blood with 99% accuracy for a price of $180. This is what I'm saying we need to do. Instead of waiting for the disease to become that end stage monstrosity and trying to kill every cell, we need to go early and try to kill the first cell. So we need to go from one gene, one protein to the opposite, a systems biology approach, use blood as a window into disease, continuously screen healthy bodies to find footprints of the impending disease, like with M-chip, which is already FDA approved, that can detect sitting at home. You can use this chip, which was developed by my colleague at Columbia University, Sam Sia. I'm working very closely with the biomedical engineers, and we are trying to develop new biomarkers that we can put next to the PSA biomarker for which it's approved. And you can just put this in a little device, and sitting at home, men can measure their PSA levels. I'm working on implantable devices that can be monitoring from birth to death, the state of health. The idea is cancer is complicated. It can show problems and markers in DNA, in RNA, in protein, in different compartments like plasma, serum, saliva, stool, urine, blood, marrow. But we can align some of these things to really go ahead and look for the markers of early detection. And then once we have the markers, we can find more targeted therapies, which would prove to be definitive, and then eventually move to the definitive treatment. And of course, that's the whole idea of the first cell. It's a the idea is to find early cancer, but what do we do if we find the first cell? Well, that's where single cell analysis using multi-omics techniques of genetics, genomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, metabolomics, and then finding the right cellular lineage, the heterogeneity on single cell level in earliest possible cancers, and then giving targeted therapy so that we can blast that early stage cancer without causing the kind of toxicities, and in the future really prevent the disease. We can't go and really start screening the whole healthy population, but there are people at high risk of getting cancer. And I don't want to scare anybody away, but you need to know this, that 1 in 5 new cancers occur in a cancer survivor. My husband, Harvey, was the best example. He got his first cancer at 34, survives it, gets his second cancer at 57 and died. So we know this population can be screened constantly. There are 1.7 million new cases a year. That means 340,000 of them occur in cancer survivors. Why aren't we looking to try to find the first cell? We established the first cell center for cancer survivors. I hope some of you young people will come and work with me on it. We plan to aggressively screen them. I started such a center already. Here's something I want to end with. If I asked my customers what they want, they would have said a faster horse. Who said this? Henry Ford. It means that the kind of thing I imagine is if you kept trying to tinker with the typewriter to improve it, we would never have developed the word processor. But once we have the word processor, whoever even remembers a typewriter? And that's the idea. We can't, people ask me, well, if you find the first cell early cancer, what are you going to do? How are you going to treat them? Give them a bone marrow transplant? Of course not, for God's sake. The treatments will co-evolve depending on what we find as the earliest footprint. The coming decade, mark my words, is going to make a 180-degree healthcare and medicine. And we are going to go from reactive to proactive, from treatment to trying to prevent, from late stage to diagnosing early stages of the disease. And in summary, then I end by telling you again, cancers diagnosed early are the only ones curable. Cancers detected late are always incurable to this day. And of course, not always, but mostly are incurable. followed by Dr. Robert Weinberg, who's the greatest scientist, one of the greatest scientists alive, and his contributions in oncology are so phenomenal. I'm one of his most ardent admirers, and that is not the point of criticizing anybody. But the only thing I want to end by saying is hope is with young people to bring new ideas to the front. And so I'll end there.
Thank you for that wonderful talk, Dr. Raza. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Weinberg. Dr. Raza will be joining us at the end of this mini symposia for our panel to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Dr. Raza.
Thank you very much.